Comings and goings all across college football, and that's the case also at Notre Dame with 6-year eligibility and also the transfer portal in play, making this an offseason unlike any other. We got Nick Shipkowski on the line from Irish Wired ND. Nick, how you doing this afternoon?
I'm good. I appreciate the invite. How are you doing, Mark?
Doing well, and let's break it down. And before we get to the personnel changes and all the moves being made in the offseason, of course, Notre Dame elevates into the Final Four in college football for a second time in 3 seasons. Your thoughts about the much debated topic of the gap between what could be called the elite and Notre Dame and where that stands. And Brian Kelly, of course, made a number of comments after the Alabama game, and just your take on the whole situation.
Well, I think when you look at it, Brian Kelly, his comments weren't popular, ticked a lot of people off, saying the bar needs to be raised. You can't be making excuses. But what he said is also accurate. I mean, you look at Notre Dame, and outside of Alabama, outside of Clemson, who have won multiple national championships in recent years, LSU has one to their name here recently. Ohio State has won, made the title game again this year. Who has Notre Dame not been on par with here the last 4 seasons? Maybe Oklahoma. Oklahoma hasn't won a playoff game when they've gotten there. They had the Classic against Georgia in the Rose Bowl, have a couple Heisman Trophy winners, but they're yet to advance when they get there. There's been some routes in not in their favor in those games as well. He's turned this program around. He's made them into a perennial top 10 team, sometimes top 5 team the last few years as well. You've seen those finishes, but he hasn't gotten over the hump. And I think that it's easy to sit and complain and look and say, well, Lou Holtz won a national championship. Dan Devine even won a national championship. Compare him to Ara Parseghian, all the legends in Notre Dame, and say, well, Brian Kelly hasn't done this. He hasn't accomplished this. And you're right, he hasn't accomplished that. But if you look at the years, roughly the 15, 16 years before he took this job, where Notre Dame was under Bob Davie, under Kyron Williams, under Charlie Weis, it was a program that, it's great if they finish in the top 10. He's raised that significantly to have top 10 be an expectation going into each year, to have college football playoff be a realistic dream, not a what the BCS was under Charlie Weis of like, oh my God, it'd be amazing if they could get to a BCS game, or under Kyron Williams. He has upped the standard a significant amount, and he has done a tremendous job there in terms of doing that. And I think that he got a lot of blame and criticism for something that I think that he said that was pretty accurate at the end of the day.
Yeah, the offensive line has consistently been one of the best in the nation, producing NFL player after NFL player. The defense, since bottoming out in 2016, has significantly been upgraded. Would it be those game-changing guys on the perimeter? Would that be the difference between where Notre Dame is and a couple of the teams that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think in terms of overall just big-time playmakers, when you see guys taken that are going to be towards the top of the draft at skill set positions, how many of them from Notre Dame can you look at? That can be defensive ends. I'm not just saying that it has to be a wide receiver or a running back, but it can be just great defensive ends that are racking up a ton of sacks. Notre Dame's had good defensive lines. Have they had those elite prospects at defensive end that can be a game-changing position? No, not so much. They've had good, maybe not great. As a unit, they've played very well, but they haven't had that kind of one first-round pick type of guy here the last few years. Look at the wide receiving group, and they've had good players there. Again, guys that have gotten drafted, played in the league for a bit, but not anyone that's going to be considered to be taken in a first or second-round pick. They haven't had those kind of elite players since really it was Michael Floyd and Golden Tate back at the end of Charlie Weis's run that were those kind of standard that were there. They've lacked that. Running back wise, they've had some good players there. Josh Adams had a Heisman campaign just a few short years ago and has went on to cash some checks in the NFL, but he's by no means like a game breaker at the next level. Kyron Williams is a very nice player. They developed him this past year. He went in as a relative unknown just because he didn't have carries the season previous and turned into one of the best running backs in the ACC. Probably, if you're ranking him, he's probably in that discussion for the 3rd best running back in the ACC last year. And that's great, but I don't know if Kyron Williams is as much the game breaker, game changer at the position when you look at some of the guys that get taken first, second round draft picks, whether it's Ezekiel Elliott in years past, name a Wisconsin running back in years past. There's plenty of those to go by. they haven't had that guy. And I think at the quarterback position, it's obvious when you see Notre Dame take on a Clemson, take on an Alabama. Ian Book did a lot of great things, set records at Notre Dame, got criticized for a lot of things that he wasn't, and I think people didn't appreciate what he was, and he might be missed here a bit this year. But I think there's an obvious gap there in terms of talent, too, of what Notre Dame's produced at quarterback and what the truly elites have done here year after year after year.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the game we love each and every day. Best discussion, debate, and analysis. That's at least our aim, mission, and goal. We got Nick Shipkowski on the line from fightingirishwire.usatoday.com. Just check out the banner right there and follow him right there for some great content on Notre Dame football coverage. 1 year probation. So I was on here live taking calls, and suddenly the news came down about a 1 year probation for Notre Dame. So suddenly people think that the sky's falling in, but it's certainly just in regards to, and you can certainly expand on this, Todd Light would be the name that's recognizable to college football fans that was involved, and run down just what happened and what has been taken away from Notre Dame. It revolves around recruiting and official visits.
Yeah, and it actually was. They were visiting. Todd Light was the defensive backs coach a couple of years ago, was replaced ahead of the 2020 season this year. He left on his own doing, went to actually, I believe it was to either coach or just to live closer to his son's high school to be more active in that. What he was doing was he showed up before a prospect's, before the July 1st date of that prospect's junior year of high school, showed up, and that's what ended up being punished for Notre Dame in that sense. And they joined the ranks of Texas A&M and Florida, who were both after the same player that ended up going to Washington in those efforts. And Notre Dame gets punished for it. And the other part of it, the second side of that, was that he had sent text messages, 10 or so text messages, or at least 10 text exchanges to another prospect from Ohio that was sent before you were supposed to be able to text a player in the writing of the rules in order to sell your program to him, sell whatever you're trying to sell to him. He sent those too early as well, and so they were seen as a problem in the eyes of the NCAA. And the final, and I think the most interesting and most ridiculous part of all of this, is that player from Ohio, one of his teammates wanted to have a picture with Brian Kelly because, oh my God, Notre Dame's football coach is at the school. I like football. That's a pretty cool thing. Can I get a picture? And Brian Kelly said, no, it's against the rules. And the kid asked again. He's like, all right, well, I don't want to be a bad guy. I'll take a picture with you. And that gets written up. Like, okay, I can understand the other parts. I can get, okay, you're breaking the rules. You're guilty of that. But the fact that that's a rule, that a player can't take a picture, even if he's being recruited or not, I think is just laughable. You have the North Carolina situations. You have a lot bigger fish to fry if you're the NCAA. And not just that is a rule, but you actually enforce that and go out of your way to reference that. I think it's laughable.
Oh, so you're actually thinking that changing players' grades in the classroom would be more important than a coach taking a picture with a high school.
These college educations that they pride themselves on these players getting, maybe they should actually get something out of those educations. Just an idea, just a thought. Maybe I'm crazy.
And to your point, Nick, if you want to make it a rule because you can see this getting out of hand, or coaches capitalizing on their celebrity, or whatever you want to say, make it a rule. And then if it's violated, just say, you know what, we're going to give you a little bit of a warning. We don't want you doing things like that. And then just let it go. And it's probably not going to happen again. But to include that and put that in the whole part of the violation seems a bit ridiculous as well. Talking up Notre Dame football, we got Nick Shipkowski on the line. You can catch him on Irish Wire ND. You see the website there on the banner. Speaking of recruiting, another fine recruiting class with 26 enrollees for 2021, ninth rated class according to the 247 Sports composite. But there's still a little bit of work to be done before that second signing day in February.
Yeah, there's still one player out there that most people, when you talk to anyone within the program, feel good about signing with Notre Dame ultimately. It was a bit of a surprise when he didn't sign in the early signing period. That's running back Logan Diggs, rated as a 3-star prospect from most outlets from the state of Louisiana, was an all-state player in the state of Louisiana, got a late offer from LSU just days before the early signing period opened, and surprised some people. The fact that he made it public, I think, brought some attention that some people weren't thinking was going to go towards him and thought for sure he was going to be signed by now. Most people you talk to still feel good about where he ends up. That's not a guarantee of any means, but that's kind of the one only player that remains out there that will or will not choose Notre Dame, and the other option there would be LSU. From everything I've heard, and maybe people are just trying to look at it through their Irish glasses or whatever it might be, but most people are pretty optimistic that he ends up signing, but that would be the one name that remains out there.
We discussed Brian Kelly's upgrade at the program, whether people think it's enough or not, certainly has been reflected in the NFL draft. So for the 2021 draft, your thoughts about who's leaving, who's staying, and who might have made a mistake or who might be a surprise one way or the other?
I think that it's no surprise you're going to see Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. He's going to be, he could really, if he was an inch taller, he'd probably be an easy top 15, and you'd make an argument that he could be a top 10 pick. His NFL body isn't perfect when they break him down combine wise and pro days and measure every little detail of every little thing. So I think he'll probably end up being in the back half of the first round just because of that. But I like to compare him as a player at Notre Dame. He was Jalen Smith as Jalen Smith was used correctly by Brian Van Gorder, the old defensive coordinator there. Like, Jalen Smith has all the talent in the world. Owusu-Koramoah does as well. A little bit smaller in size than Smith, than what you usually like the linebackers to be NFL-wise, but he's going to be a heck of an athlete for someone there. He's going to be their one first-round pick. Maybe Liam Eichenberg, the left tackle, can sneak into a first round. A guy that I'm very high on, and I'm surprised each time I kind of read the draft profiles and see mock drafts of where he ends up going, is offensive guard Aaron Banks. I thought that he played that position as well as anyone in the country this year. I thought when the Notre Dame beat Clemson that you could argue that he was the best player on the field outside of Owusu-Koramoah in that game. When Notre Dame needed yards, that's where they went to. There was no big thing in the first Notre Dame Clemson game in the 2018 Cotton Bowl was that pressures that were just coming from the inside. That wasn't to be found in that game against Clemson. And he was a huge reason for that. He was a huge reason for Ian Book being able to extend plays, scramble, and win that game. I think that if he ends up being a third-round pick like a lot of these projections have him as, that's going to be a steal of a middle-round draft pick for a team at that position. And the one that's really interesting that I think took a lot of Notre Dame fans and followers by surprise was tight end Tommy Tremble. Tommy Tremble, if you watch Notre Dame games, they like to throw three tight ends out there. And you could argue that he was the most violent of any of those blockers of the three tight ends that they like to run behind. Didn't always have big-time reception numbers, but could make some big-time catches along the way. Opener in 2019 against Louisville, he played a very good game. I think he had no touchdowns, but he had two big receptions to get Notre Dame down near the goal line, and made some big catches against that Clemson game this year as well, the regular season one at least. It was a bit of a surprise when you look at his numbers and see someone with, I think, under 20 receptions for the year is what he had. So it was a little bit interesting. Then you have to see from the pros perspective, all right, well, Michael Mayer's also there at tight end. He's going to get the bulk of targets going into next year. Is Tremble going to gain anything NFL-wise in the eyes of scouts if he's to stay another year? Tough to argue against him going, but I don't know if he has a ton to gain necessarily from it. I think he could have used another year to showcase his receiving skills because I think that those weren't fully on display.
Tremble's blocking was so effective. I saw it highlighted on a number of the major studio shows leading into the ACC championship game and the college football playoff. Definitely. We got Nick Shipkowski on the line. You can catch him on USA Today. It's on fightingirishwire.usatoday.com. You see it right there on the banner, writing for Irish Wire ND. Jack Cohn comes into the competition for quarterback. He would certainly be the lead. He led a team at Wisconsin to the Rose Bowl, had a nice 18-5 touchdown to pick ratio that season. Maybe some detractors would say you're getting yourself another Ian Book, not a game changer, not a dynamic player, but at the same time, maybe he could show us more if given more responsibility. Is he definitely the guy, or how does the quarterback competition size up in 21?
Yeah, I think you go in, and I don't think the question is as much, is he the starting quarterback when Notre Dame takes on Florida State on Labor Day weekend? I think the question's more, who's the quarterback mid-year? Who's the quarterback 6 games, 7 games in? because they brought in as highly touted a quarterback as they've had since Gunnar Kiel a few years ago, and that didn't work out at Notre Dame. He ended up transferring to Cincinnati. But who they brought in Tyler Buckner, he was at one time a 5-star recruit. One of the passing camps, he didn't put on the display that was wanted or was that impressive, and he dropped a star ranking, a 4-star. Still a top 50 recruit on both Rivals and on 247 Sports. One of the bigger quarterbacks recruits that they've brought in quite some time. And what's interesting with him is his sophomore year had a leg injury, missed part of the year for that. His junior year had phenomenal numbers, was a one-man offense that put up ridiculous numbers, both running game, passing game-wise, led his team deep into the California State playoffs. And then this past year didn't get to play football because of the pandemic that's gone on globally, and California didn't have high school football this past season. So he's got, for a guy that comes in with that pedigree of being a solid 4-star recruit, some thinking he should be a 5-star, he doesn't have a ton of playing experience. So I'm interested to see, they're obviously very high on him and very excited about him. There's no way I think that you can have a kid come out of his senior year of high school where he didn't even play football and expect him to start right away. But I do know that they are extremely high on him, and I would think that he'll probably challenge for playing time, if nothing else, as the year goes on. But yeah, for going into this year, I think that's going to be Jack Cohen. And I think that you're right. I think that he's kind of like an Ian Book light almost. I do think he throws the ball downfield better from what I've seen from him than Book did. Now, where I think Notre Dame is really going to miss Book this next year is how much of the offensive line they lose, and Book's ability to just extend plays. You cannot overstate how valuable that was to this team, not just this year, really the last 3 years. And without an offensive line full of future NFL players, or at least of NFL players in the upcoming draft like this past year's was, having a quarterback that's not as mobile in Cohen versus Book, I think that's going to not spell disaster for Notre Dame, but it's definitely going to be a hurdle that they're going to have to overcome.
If you enjoyed the content, please hit the like button. Also, if you're joining us for the first time or have only seen a couple videos, please check out the video displays and subscribe if you like what you see. Check out Nick's work there at fightingirishwire.usatoday.com. Nick, for the first time here, we appreciate you stopping by, giving us some insight and knowledge into Notre Dame football.
Anytime. That was a lot of fun. Appreciate the invite.